Let me just ask you a couple of questions about his reputation. So in some ways, Dr. Henry Kissinger is known as being perhaps the master strategist. I mean, one of the interesting elements to that is, as you have recounted, really at the core of the Nixon administration's policy towards Vietnam in its first term was Vietnamization. That was actually Melvin Laird's preferred approach, not that of Henry Kissinger. So it sort of looks like a fundamental bureaucratic battle that shaped the administration's approach. Henry Kissinger was not on the winning side of that argument. Is that a fair?
That's more than fair. That's an accurate statement, that he lost that battle and he carried the scars from that political battle with him. One of the things that he wanted to make sure was that Laird was cut out of almost every important decision on Vietnam after that. And he's always saying things to the president. I mean, we have this enormous treasure trove of sources. We have over, I think it's 300,000 pages of telephone conversations. The Nixon Library has just released almost everything that's not a national security issue from this time period. And then Kissinger's own papers are now available at Yale, his pre-government and his post-government. So from those sources, and then I can use Vietnamese sources as well, from those sources we get a very clear understanding of the really dysfunctional relationships in this administration. And it's clear, conversation after conversation with the president, Kissinger will say things like, don't tell Laird he'll chicken out. Don't tell Laird he won't support that. Don't tell Laird he'll never get behind this military policy. You know, that's the way the administration was on Vietnam. Now, I don't know about other areas. I do Vietnam. There are other people who may say, in the Middle East, he was right on target, he did this right, he did that right. Or with détente with the Soviets and Chinese outside of Vietnam. Détente with the Soviets and Chinese inside of Vietnam was a disaster in many ways. And it was about Vietnam in many ways. So there were political rivalries that drove a lot of this. That's not saying that strategic considerations didn't come first, but these political rivalries were a factor. So much so that Nixon formed what he called the Henry Hand-Holding Committee, because Kissinger threatened to quit almost every day over this dysfunction and this rivalry with Rogers and Laird. And so Nixon wanted, to get Kissinger away from him, keep him out of the office. So he set up a little committee that when Henry got in one of those moods, as Nixon called it, they kept him out of the Oval Office.
So that brings me sort of to my next question about reputation. I think that many of us in this room, if asked, or if we were to guess, among the Americans that follow foreign affairs who are interested, if there was a question raised, who is the foremost American foreign policy expert or wise man in the United States alive today, probably the name Henry Kissinger would come up more than any other. So how do you sort of explain that disconnect between the individual character that's in your book and that sterling reputation?
Yeah, he would come up on my list too, as a theorist. I think Henry Kissinger is very smart, he's witty, he's charming, he understands grand strategy. He just didn't practice it well, in my view, especially in Vietnam. I do think that much of his time out of office has been spent editing his time in office. No one has cared for their legacy more than Henry Kissinger. No one who was in government has published as many pages about their time in government. And Kissinger is brilliant, and and he's an absolutely beautiful writer. And so you combine those, and he's charming, and who doesn't want to sit next to him at dinner? And he's plugged himself into the social scenes in the places he needs to be plugged in. And I understand that completely. But when it came to being close to the people who were doing the actual fighting and dying, he was removed. He was a theorist who stuck to theorist dreams. And I think it cost the country in Vietnam. It cost the country dearly. And that's something I take very, very seriously. If you're going to put men and women in harm's way, you have to give it more than just your theoretical best. You really have to be able to look parents in the eye and say, we were pursuing a policy in national interest, and we took this path, and this is the full debate we had about that, and Congress got on board, and we came to you, remember, and you said yes. None of that took place. And in a functioning democracy, I think you have to have those full and frank discussions. And so I still assign Kissinger to my students. He is a brilliant theorist, but in Vietnam, in practice, his practice was very, very different than his theories of statesmanship.